Hello, creepers. Before we dive in, hit like, subscribe, and drop in the comments. Where in history should the zombie outbreak hit next? Now let's get to it. The siege had ended, yet the air still reeked of death. Acre's walls stood broken, its gates shattered, and the ground inside the city was a carpet of corpses, Saracen and crusader alike. We had won, or so the masters said. But victory felt hollow when the flies were thicker than the banners. I served under Brother Geoffroy, a Templar of stern face and few words. We were ordered to guard the quarter by the harbor, where the wounded were gathered. The streets were narrow, the stones slick with old blood. Ships from every corner of Christendom filled the port, unloading food, water, and new banners to replace the torn ones. It should have felt like triumph. Instead, I remember only the silence of the wind and the sound of crows tearing at the fallen. We spent our mornings in prayer, then burned the heaps of dead that filled the alleys. The stench clung to our armor. The brothers said the smoke would keep the pestilence away, but the sickness still spread among the men. Some knights fell fevered within a day, their skin gray, their breath shallow. The surgeons spoke of foul humors and bad air. Others whispered that God was testing us, that the unburied souls of the infidels cursed the city. I did not know what to believe. I only knew that Acre was no longer a place for the living. At night, we took shifts on the walls. The torches burned low, the sea wind cold against the mail under my surcoat. From my post, I could see the fields beyond the city, where our dead lay in rows awaiting burial. The moonlight glinted off their helmets like the eyes of watching beasts. One night, while I walked the rampart, Brother Etienne spoke to me. "They say one of the corpses moved," he muttered, his face pale beneath the helm. A squire swore it, said he saw a dead man twitch when the cart tipped. "Fevered talk," I said. "The heat plays tricks on tired eyes." He nodded, but his hand stayed on the hilt of his sword. The next morning, I was sent to the lower quarter to escort a group of pilgrims. The place was thick with ash and ruin. A surgeon stood over a heap of burned men, his hands shaking as he threw salt over the bodies. I asked what he did. "Even ashes may carry the pestilence," he said. "We burn them twice." As I turned to leave, I heard a sound, a wet gasp, low and guttural. The surgeon froze. From the pile, one of the burned men shifted. His arm, charred black, twitched like a puppet string pulled by unseen hands. For a moment, I thought it the tremor of heat. Then the corpse's mouth opened, and a stream of blackened air hissed out. The surgeon stumbled backward, crossing himself so fast he dropped his flask. "It's the devil's work," he whispered. I stepped forward, sword half drawn, and saw the eyes of the corpse. They were milky, unfocused, but moving. Still, I hesitated. A man's body can spasm after death. That's what we'd been told. Yet as I watched, the thing's fingers clawed weakly at the stones, as if trying to rise. I drove my blade through its skull. The movement stopped. Silence returned, broken only by the surgeon's ragged breath. When I reported what I saw, the sergeant dismissed it. "You did what had to be done. Do not speak of this. The men are already frightened." That night, I could not sleep. The torches guttered in the wind, and the smoke from the pyres rolled through the camp like fog. The prayers of my brothers drifted over the walls, but I could not find comfort in them. I kept seeing that burned face, hearing that hiss of breath. I told myself it was just a trick of decay, the last twitch of the dead. Yet in my heart, I felt the first stirrings of dread, the kind that no prayer could silence. Something was wrong in Acre. Something terrible had begun. 3 days passed before the truth began to show itself. The sickness spread faster than the surgeons could treat it. At first, they said it was the heat and the rot. But then the dead stopped staying dead. I was in the market square when it happened. The air was thick with flies, and the brothers were hauling corpses to the pyres. A young hospitaller fell while dragging a body. He gasped, clutched his neck, and went still. The surgeon covered him with a cloak. We moved on. Then the man beneath the cloak began to move. At first, it was only a twitch of his foot. Then his hand lifted, curling like a claw. I heard the surgeon's cry just before the dead man grabbed him by the sleeve and bit deep into his wrist. The screams carried across the square. I drew my sword and ran to help, but more corpses were moving, slowly, clumsily, but with strength born of madness. One of them lunged at a pilgrim and pulled him down. Another tore a strip from a squire's throat. The men broke ranks. The market became a storm of shouting and steel. Some swung their swords wildly, others fled. Etienne was dragged down beneath them, vanishing under a tide of clawing hands. I thought him lost, until I saw him rise again, blood streaking his helm as another brother pulled him free. Together they cut a path back to the line, their blades slick with black blood. We formed a small circle around the surgeon's cart, 4 of us, shields locked, blades ready. The creatures came from every side. Their flesh was gray, some blackened by the fire. They did not bleed. They only groaned as they pressed forward. "Hold!" Brother Geoffroy shouted. They hit us like a wave. The first one clawed at my shield, its fingers scraping the wood. I struck low, cutting its legs out from under it. Another grabbed my shoulder, its teeth snapping just below my visor. I slammed my pommel into its face until it stopped moving. We fought until our arms shook. When the last one fell, the square was silent except for the moans of the wounded. The bodies lay scattered across the stones, some still twitching. Geoffroy gave the order to burn everything. No burial, no prayer. Fire alone, he said. By dusk, the pyres burned again. The smell was worse than before. It was the smell of flesh that refused to rest. That night, the bells of the Church of St. John rang without reason. Men ran through the streets shouting that the dead had risen in the lower quarter. We took torches and marched there in formation. The alleys were narrow, and the smoke made the air thick. Shadows moved between the ruined tents. I saw one stumble toward us, a soldier, his chainmail black with soot. His jaw hung open, one eye gone. Geoffroy stepped forward and called to him. "Brother, are you wounded?" The man made no answer. He only advanced, dragging his sword along the stones. Then he broke into a run. We met him with shields. It took 3 of us to bring him down. When his helm rolled away, I saw his face, pale, veins dark beneath the skin, mouth full of blood. He was one of ours. We pushed deeper into the quarter and found more like him. Dozens. The streets were filled with them. Soldiers, pilgrims, townsfolk, all moving as one. We formed a line, shields tight, and fought our way back toward the citadel. The sound of battle was not like war. It was worse. There were no commands, no order, only screams and the wet crack of blades cutting bone. When we reached the gate, we saw the fires spreading. The city was burning. Brother Geoffroy gave the order to seal the gates. The guards hesitated, for men were still outside. Some pounded on the doors, begging to be let in. Others were already being dragged down by the dead. I remember one man, a priest, pressing his hands against the gate, shouting prayers. The next moment, something pulled him backward into the dark. His scream stopped as quickly as it began. We shut the gates. The iron bolts dropped into place. The brothers stood in silence, the torches flickering over their faces. None of us spoke. We had locked out our own. Geoffroy turned to me and said quietly, "Whatever this is, it is no pestilence. It is judgment." I looked over the wall. The streets beyond were full of movement, firelight glinting off rusted steel and pale faces. For the first time, I felt the fear of men who have seen too much battle. The kind that comes when you realize victory no longer matters, because the enemy is already inside the city, and death itself has taken the field. By morning, Acre was unrecognizable. Smoke drifted above the city like a shroud. The cries had not stopped through the night. Every alley carried the same sound: screaming, steel, and the dull moan of the dead. We were ordered to hold the citadel gates. The Templars, Hospitallers, and soldiers from every banner gathered there, their armor streaked with ash. The masters argued over what to do. Some demanded we march out to cleanse the city. Others said we should wait, fortify, and pray. None of them had slept. None of us had. I stood with Brother Etienne and 2 sergeants on the wall. From that height, I could see the harbor. Ships were trying to flee, their decks crowded with panicked men. Some leapt into the water, hoping to swim clear. The sea itself seemed to writhe, filled with the dead who had fallen in during the fighting. Geoffroy found me as the sun rose, his voice hoarse. "We cannot hold this place," he said. "Too many have fallen sick. Too many rise again." He ordered a retreat to the inner quarter where the old Templar house stood. The plan was to gather survivors, seal the doors, and wait for the master's word. It was only a few streets away, but those streets had become a battlefield. We moved in a column, 15 men, shields up, moving through ash and ruin. The smell was unbearable. Flies swarmed around the bodies piled against the walls. We passed a burning stable, horses screaming as the flames took them. The sound stayed in my ears long after we moved on. At a crossroads, we found a group of townsfolk trapped behind overturned carts. They begged for help. One of them held a child who did not move. Geoffroy hesitated, but before we could decide, the child twitched in the woman's arms and sank its teeth into her neck. The woman's scream drew the horde. Shapes appeared at the far end of the street. Soldiers, pilgrims, and townspeople alike, all moving with that same mindless hunger. "Shields!" Geoffroy shouted. They came fast. Some still wore their armor, others only rags. Their eyes were dull, their mouths black with blood. We held them at the narrow point of the street, blades flashing. Every strike sent more falling, but still they came. The weight of them drove us back step by step. One of the sergeants fell, pulled down as his footing slipped on the stones. I tried to reach him, but the swarm covered him. By the time we cleared them, there was nothing left of his face. We pressed on, turning toward the Templar house. Smoke rolled from the rooftops, and the bell of St. John's tolled again, echoing across the city like a funeral song. When we reached the compound, the gates of the Templar house stood closed. Smoke drifted through the ruined street, and no answer came to Geoffroy's call. "Open! Brothers of the Temple, it's Geoffroy of Tyre," only silence replied. The dead were closing in, figures staggering from the haze, their moans growing louder with every step. Etienne glanced back, his voice tight. "We're surrounded." Geoffroy raised his sword. "Form up. Shields to the gate. We hold until we fall." We took our stand in the shadow of our own walls, backs pressed to the iron doors. The air trembled with the sound of the horde. I could smell the rot before I saw their faces. Pale, blistered, eyes cloudy with hunger. Then, From above, a shout broke through the noise. "Templars in the street! Hold fast!" Arrows hissed overhead. The first volley struck the front ranks of the dead, dropping them like wheat. More shafts followed, loosed in steady rhythm. The archers on the wall called out as they fired. "To the gate! Quickly!" The doors groaned open just wide enough for a man to pass. "Inside, brothers! Move!" We fell back step by step, dragging the wounded. Geoffroy was the last to enter. He turned and struck down one of the dead that slipped between us before the gate slammed shut. The iron bar dropped into place. The dead struck the doors again and again, their fists thudding like war drums. The wood shuddered under every blow, but it held. Still, pounding continued, steady, relentless, echoing through the yard. The courtyard within was half in ruin, but life still clung to it. A few stood guard: Templars, Hospitallers, Crusaders, their armor blackened with ash. Behind them, huddled in small groups, priests, pilgrims, women, children, and wounded men. Some clutched prayer beads or small crosses. Others only stared at the walls, as if afraid to breathe. A Templar officer approached, his surcoat torn. "You made it," he said, gripping Geoffroy's arm. "We've taken in as many as we can. The dead fill the streets, but the house holds." Geoffroy bowed his head. "Then we stand with you." A child cried somewhere inside. A woman tried to hush him, her voice trembling. It sounded more human than anything I'd heard in days. Etienne looked around the courtyard. "If this place falls," he began, but his words faded. "It won't," Geoffroy said. "Not while a Templar draws breath." I looked up at the chapel roof, where the red cross still caught the firelight. The city beyond the walls burned, but here, for a moment, there was still order, still faith, still humanity. Acre was dying, yet inside these walls, the living had not surrendered. And as long as the Templar house stood, neither would we. In the first days, we still believed rescue would come. The dead could not walk forever, we told ourselves. They would rot, starve, and fall before our stores ran dry. The fortress was strong, the walls unbroken, and God would not forsake his knights. Some said the crusader fleets would return. Others said the pestilence would fade when the air cleared. We prayed, we waited, and we believed. A week passed. The air grew foul with smoke and death. From the parapet, I could see the city below. Streets filled with husks that no longer bled, only moved. They wandered without purpose, slower now, but never still. The moaning no longer frightened anyone. It was just part of the wind. Food and water were rationed. Bread turned hard as stone, and the wine was stretched thin with water. We gave the little we had to the children first. The townsfolk huddled near the chapel, weak and trembling. Some prayed. Others simply stared at the walls, waiting for the sound of salvation that never came. No ships appeared on the horizon. No banners rose from the east. The roads were silent, and the sea carried only the stink of rot. The courtyard grew quieter each day. Fewer hymns were sung. The priests' voices cracked from hunger. The sick were laid beneath the portico, where they coughed into rags and waited for mercy. The rest of us repaired the walls, oiled our blades, and prayed without words. Geoffroy still carried himself like a man of faith, but I saw the shadow in his eyes when he looked upon the starving. "If this is a test," he once murmured, "it is not of courage, but endurance." 2 weeks after the fall of Acre, we saw the truth from the western tower. The dead outside the walls had not fallen. They were slower, rotting, and blackened by the sun, but still they moved. Still they hungered. They should have fallen by now, someone whispered beside me. No one answered. Hope cracked then. The idea that time or faith would save us died with that sight. Rescue had not come. No messenger from Tyre, no fleet from the sea. Some began to whisper that the world outside the walls was dying too, that this was not Acre's curse alone, but all of Christendom's. A few said the end of days had come, and that the dead were God's punishment. That night, the commander called the remaining knights and priests to the chapel. Candles flickered weakly along the altar. Everyone looked gaunt, hollow-eyed, and tired beyond words. The stores will not last another week, the commander said. If we wait, the living will starve before the dead ever breach our gates. A priest objected. To leave the fortress is death. To act against God's will is sin. Another voice rose from the shadows. And to watch children die is not? The argument spread like fire. Some begged to stay, trusting God to deliver them. Others demanded action, saying that the Lord helps those who move their own hands. Geoffroy stepped forward. The temple swore to guard the innocent, not to wall ourselves away while they waste to bone. We go, we search, and we bring back what life remains. The commander hesitated, then nodded. Then so be it. A small patrol. You know the city best. Take those willing. A plan was made before dawn. First, the market quarter, where granaries and merchant stores might still hold grain or dried goods. Then, the Hospitaller fortress ruins, to search for medicine or water. If nothing could be found, their final hope would be the port warehouses, half sunk and dangerous, but perhaps still holding salted fish or wine. When the meeting ended, the knights crossed themselves in silence. None said what we all knew, that few who left the gates would ever return. Later, as I sharpened my blade by torchlight, I listened to the wind rattle the chapel door. The city beyond was quiet now, as if it waited for us. I wondered if any part of the world beyond Acre still lived, or if the same silence ruled every kingdom. Etienne sat beside me, his hands trembling as he tied his belt. If we die tomorrow, he said softly, I hope it's quick. Geoffroy approached, fastening his helm beneath his chin. We die when God wills it, he said, but not before we do what must be done. He looked to the window where the faintest gray touched the sky. At dawn, we walk into hell. I rose, gripping my sword until my knuckles ached. Outside, the dead still wandered the streets, slow and endless. Inside, our torches burned low, and the smell of hunger filled the air. Acre was dying, and at sunrise, we would follow it into the dark. We left at dawn. The fortress gates creaked open with a sound that echoed across the dead city. Pale light spilled through the fog, turning the streets to ash. There were 8 of us in all, Geoffroy leading, Etienne beside him, and 6 brothers sworn to follow. Each of us carried what strength we had left: swords, shields, torches, and the last of our courage. I remember the feel of the air as we stepped beyond the walls. It was cold, heavy, and wrong. The gates closed behind us, sealing the others inside. For a moment, I wished they hadn't. We moved through the lower streets, where the stench of death was thick enough to taste. Bodies lay in heaps along the walls. Some were burned, others half-eaten. A few still twitched when the wind stirred their limbs. Etienne muttered a prayer. May their souls find rest. Geoffroy answered, Their souls are gone. What's left is only the shell. We kept to the shadows, moving slow. The dead were scattered now, not in the hordes we'd faced before. They drifted like sleepwalkers, turning at the slightest noise. The trick was silence. We passed within yards of them, hearts pounding, weapons ready, but unused. Our first stop was the market quarter. What once had been a place of shouting and trade was now a ruin of fire and dust. The stalls were overturned, the tents burned to black frames. The smell of rot and spices mixed into something foul. We searched the granaries first. Rats scurried over sacks of spoiled grain. The air was filled with flies. A few barrels of oil remained, but no food fit for the living. "Nothing here," one of the brothers whispered. "Keep searching," Geoffroy said. "There must be something." I forced open a locked door beside the main square. Inside was a bakery, half collapsed but still standing. The shelves were bare, yet the cellar below held a miracle. A few sealed jars of dried lentils and salted fish. I almost laughed. In another time, it would have been a poor man's meal. Now, it was worth blood. We took what we could carry, wrapping it in cloth and tying it to our belts. As we turned to leave, Etienne froze. "Listen," he said. At first I heard nothing but wind. Then the sound came, a faint dragging, a shuffle of feet in the dust. Dozens of them, maybe more. We moved back toward the street, blades drawn. The first of the dead appeared through the smoke, eyes pale and unseeing. Then another. Then 10. "They've caught our scent," Geoffroy said. "Move!" We ran, the noise drawing more from the alleys. I could hear their moans behind us, rising in number. The city itself seemed to wake as we fled. We cut through a narrow passage and emerged near the ruins of a chapel. The dead followed, crawling over one another to reach us. Geoffroy led us through the door, and we barred it with a fallen beam. The pounding started almost at once, fists, shoulders, and skulls thudding against the wood. Etienne drove his sword through the first that broke through a window. "There are too many!" he shouted. "Then we fight!" The next few minutes were chaos, steel flashing in the half-light, screams and the stink of death filling the air. One of the younger brothers was dragged down. Geoffroy split the creature's skull, but couldn't save him. We pulled back toward the rear door. "The alley!" I shouted. "This way!" We broke through, spilling into the street beyond. The dead poured after us, endless and hungry. By the time we reached the square again, only 5 of us remained. My arms were shaking, and my sword edge was dull. Geoffroy pointed toward the east. "The Hospitaller Fortress. If we reach it, we can rest and regroup." We moved fast, cutting through alleys thick with smoke. The dead followed in smaller numbers now, scattered but relentless. The city was a maze of ruin and fire. When we finally saw the Hospitaller compound, my heart sank. The once proud walls stood untouched, yet inside was the aftermath of a massacre. We entered cautiously. The stench of death met us before the sight did. Bodies, shattered shields, and blood baked dark by the sun. From a half-burned tower, the Hospitaller's banner hung in torn silence. Etienne knelt beside a broken doorway. "They fought hard," he said. Geoffroy nodded. "They died well." We searched the ruins anyway. In the cellars, we found barrels of dried herbs and bandages, useless for hunger, but proof that men had lived here once. I found a few small jars of honey sealed in wax, still good. I handed one to Etienne. "It's something," I said. He smiled weakly. "Better than faith on an empty stomach." Before we could rest, we heard a noise. Metal scraping stone. One of the brothers turned, sword raised. A figure stumbled from the shadows, armor black with soot. It was a Templar. He raised his hands in peace. "Hold, brothers," he said, voice hoarse. "I mean no harm." Geoffroy lowered his sword slightly. "Name yourself." "Brother Odo of Marseille," he answered. "I was part of the patrol stationed in the citadel when the city fell. Most of my company died in the market quarter. I escaped toward the port and took shelter in a watchtower." He looked worn, his eyes hollow, his armor scratched and soot-streaked. But he was alive. "I've been seeing smoke from the Templar house," Odo continued. "I thought perhaps survivors remained, but the streets were crawling with the dead. I couldn't reach you. When I heard fighting earlier, I followed the noise. I hoped it was you." "How did you manage to survive all this time?" I asked. Odo gave a faint, weary smile. "Kept quiet, really quiet. Almost died once, not from the dead, but from starvation." Geoffroy glanced at me. "And how did you survive that?" "I raided the docks," Odo said. "Desperation makes a man brave." Etienne stepped closer. "You've been at the port? What did you find?" Odo nodded. "The warehouses still stand. Some are damaged, but I found barrels, grain, fish, even water casks. The place is dangerous, full of the dead, but it's not empty. I know the path. There's a way along the seawall that avoids most of the streets." Geoffroy listened in silence, then said, "Then you'll guide us." "If you'll have me," Odo said. "I would rather die among brothers than alone." "You'll not die yet," Geoffroy told him. "Rest while you can. We move at dawn." We made camp inside a ruined chapel in the fortress. The dead still roamed outside. Too few to storm the place, but too many to rest easy. None of us slept. The night passed with the sound of the sea and the faint creak of armor in the dark. When dawn came, the first light spilled through the broken windows, painting the floor in pale gold. Geoffroy stood and fastened his helm. "At sunrise, we move for the port," he said. I rose beside him, tightening my grip on my sword. Etienne crossed himself, whispering a prayer. Odo checked his blade and nodded once, grim and steady. Outside, the streets waited, silent, gray, and full of death. Inside, our torches burned low, and our hope burned lower still. But we were knights of the temple, sworn to guard what life remained. And as the sun rose over Acre, we stepped once more into the jaws of hell. The first light of dawn crept over the ruins as we set out. The sea wind cut through the smoke that hung above Acre, carrying the stench of salt and death. Odo led the way along the seawall, his armor dulled to keep from catching the light. Below us, waves crashed against the stone, washing foam over the bodies that had fallen days before. None of us spoke. Words felt too loud in a city where every echo could draw death. The path was narrow, the stones slick with moss. Twice, we stopped to let small groups of the dead shuffle past below, their hollow eyes staring through the mist. We moved like ghosts above them, every step measured. The closer we came to the port, the tighter the air grew, heavy with smoke, rotting timber, and burned pitch. We passed a collapsed watchtower, the same one Odo said he had hidden in. Its walls were scorched, but the stair still held. "I used to watch from here," he whispered. "At night, they wander the streets below like ants. But the seawall stays clear." It didn't stay clear for long. A shape lurched out from a doorway ahead, silent, fast. I reacted before thought. My hand clamped over its mouth as we slammed against the wall. The stench of decay hit me like fire. It thrashed, its teeth scraping the inside of my gauntlet. I drew my dagger and drove it through the eye. The body sagged, twitching once before going still. Odo steadied the corpse and lowered it to the stones. "Quietly now," he muttered. Geoffroy gave me a nod. No praise, just acknowledgement. We moved on. By the time the port came into view, the sun had climbed enough to paint the water in dull gold. The old warehouses stood like tombs. Stone walls, scorched doors, shadows deep enough to hide an army. Smoke drifted from a collapsed roof nearby, but the rest was silent. We split into two groups. Geoffroy, Etienne, and one brother took the larger grain stores, while Odo, another knight, and I went for the smaller ones. Our meeting point was a courtyard behind the warehouses, marked by a toppled cart. Inside, the air was thick with dust. Rats scattered at our approach. Broken barrels lined the floor, their contents long spoiled. We searched in silence, blades ready. Then Odo called softly. "Here." He knelt beside a sealed crate. Together we pried it open. Inside were sacks of dried lentils and salted fish, wrapped in cloth and still good. Nearby, a barrel sloshed when I moved it. Water, not wine. I almost laughed. As we packed what we could, something shifted behind us. A scrape of wood, a breath that didn't belong. I turned just as a fallen stack of crates rolled aside. A corpse pinned beneath them stretched out a gray arm and seized my ankle. Its fingers dug through the chainmail. I dropped to a knee, grabbed its throat, and pressed my palm over its mouth to smother the moan. Its body bucked and twisted. I pulled my dagger free and drove it through the temple. The body went limp. Odo helped drag it away, his face set. "They're close," he said. "Then we move faster." We found 2 merchant barrows and loaded them with supplies. Grain, fish, oil jars, and the water cask. The weight was heavy, but hope made it bearable. When we reached the rendezvous, Geoffroy and Etienne were already waiting beside a small mountain of barrels. "We found grain," Geoffroy said. "Enough for weeks if rationed." Etienne took a drink from a water flask and laughed, weak but real. "Sweetest thing I've ever tasted," he said. For a moment, we were just men again. No war, no dead, just the relief of life. Geoffroy allowed himself a faint smile. "This will keep the children alive." Odo looked toward the sea, where the sunlight shimmered over broken ships. "We might have a chance after all." We loaded the carts and secured them with rope. No one mentioned the danger that still surrounded us. For the first time in weeks, silence felt safe. As we rested in the shadow of the warehouses, the wind carried the sound of gulls and waves. No screams, no fire, no death. "Tomorrow," Geoffroy said quietly, "we bring this home." For the first time since Acre fell, hope felt like something more than a prayer. We left the port before sunrise. The air was heavy with smoke, the streets quiet, but never still. Odo led us through the back alleys behind the warehouses, away from the main roads where the dead swarmed thickest. The carts creaked under the weight of food and water, their wheels groaning over the cobblestones. Every sound felt like a risk, every step a prayer. The narrow way twisted between burned houses and shattered stalls. Broken shutters swung in the wind. We kept our heads low, moving fast but silent. The smell of the sea mixed with rot and ash. Then, from above, a sound. Soft at first, then sharper. A scraping. I looked up. A corpse leaned out from a window, pale arms hanging loose. Its blind eyes flicked toward us. Then it dropped. The thing landed squarely on one of our brothers. The impact threw both to the ground. The knight screamed once before teeth met flesh. Geoffroy reacted first, his sword flashing down through both of them in a single stroke. Blood sprayed across the stones. The street went dead silent. Then the moaning started. From every side alley, the noise grew. Shuffling feet, scraping steel, low throats calling in unison. Shapes emerged from the smoke, first a few, then more. "Shields!" Geoffroy shouted. We formed a line, shields locked. The first of the dead struck us like waves breaking on a wall. Swords rose and fell, steel biting through bone. One came at me low. I met it with my shield and drove my blade through its jaw. Etienne took another through the throat, wrenching his weapon free with a grunt. For a moment, it felt manageable. The discipline held. Then the next wave came. Dozens poured from both ends of the alley, drawn by the noise and the scent of blood. Their hands clawed at the stones, their faces twisted in hunger. "Fall back!" Geoffroy barked. We turned, dragging the carts with us. The wheels rattled, the weight slowing us down. The dead followed fast, their steps uneven but relentless. We broke into a wider street, the market detour. The air was thick with smoke and ash. The horde behind us grew louder, closer. I could feel the ground trembling under their number. Ahead, more figures appeared, stumbling from a side passage to block our way. "Keep moving!" I shouted. Etienne lowered his shoulder and hit the first square in the chest, crushing it beneath his shield. Odo swung his sword as he ran, taking another's head clean off. We didn't stop. We moved like machines, trained, ruthless, desperate. Still, the noise kept drawing more. By the time we reached the square, the horde behind us filled the street. The sound was deafening. Groans, scraping, the slap of flesh on stone. Geoffroy looked ahead. More of the dead were spilling from a collapsed stable, blocking our way. Behind, the horde was almost on our heels. There was no room to turn, no time to fight. He met our eyes. "They'll trap us here," he said. "I'll draw them off. Clear the way." "No!" Etienne shouted, but Geoffroy had already turned. He raised his sword and charged straight into the approaching dead, shouting a prayer loud enough to shake the smoke. His voice echoed down the street, then vanished in the roar of the horde. We had no time to mourn. "Move!" Odo yelled. We ran. Two of the creatures staggered into our path. I met the first mid-stride, smashing it aside with my shield. The second fell beneath Odo's blade, its head splitting as he passed. The carts bounced and clattered. My arms burned from the strain. The horde was still behind us, closer than ever. Then, through the haze, I saw it. The Templar house. The red cross still hung from its walls, torn but standing. The gates were open, and men fought before them. Brothers, crusaders, and hospitallers, only a handful, holding the line. "Almost there!" Etienne cried. A sound split the air, a deep, thunderous crack. The trebuchet by the gate fired. A flaming shot screamed overhead and smashed into the street behind us. The impact burst in a spray of fire and smoke, scattering burning bodies in every direction. The sight filled us with new strength. We ran harder. The trebuchet fired again, then a third time. Each blast tore holes through the mass of the dead. Arrows hissed down from the walls, piercing skulls and shoulders. The horde faltered, then surged again, but smaller now. Maybe 36 still chasing. The defenders shouted for us to hurry. I could see their faces, streaked with sweat and soot. "Faster!" Odo roared. "Move those carts!" We hit the final stretch, pushing with everything left in our bodies. The gates loomed larger. The horde screamed behind us. The first cart crashed through the entry. Etienne was next, dragging the second. I stumbled through after him, turning just in time to see the defenders heave the great doors shut. A dozen of the dead forced their way through before the iron bar dropped. Inside the courtyard, the battle was chaos. Swords flashed. Men shouted. The infected slammed into us with wild fury. One grabbed my arm, pulling me down, but Etienne split its skull before it could bite. Odo smashed another to the ground, his boot crushing its throat. I saw a hospitaller lose his footing. I pulled him up and drove my blade through the creature that had him cornered. The clang of steel echoed against the walls. Then, silence. The last body fell, head crushed beneath a Templar's mace. Smoke drifted over the courtyard. The pounding outside the gate continued, dull but distant. Etienne leaned against a wall, breath ragged. "He bought us this," he said. Odo wiped his blade and stared toward the smoke. "Geoffroy." I looked at the carts, the barrels, the sacks of grain now safe behind the walls. The sound of fists against iron came again from outside. Steady, endless, a reminder that it wasn't over. "He kept his vow," I said quietly. "The living endure." The wind carried the smell of ash across the yard. The banners above the gate hung limp in the gray light. Acre was still dying. But for one more day, the fortress still stood. The fortress was alive again. Laughter, weak but real, echoed across the courtyard. The survivors crowded around the carts as the barrels were opened and the sacks untied. Bowls of boiled grain and salted fish were passed from hand to hand, and for the first time in weeks, the smell of cooking filled the air instead of smoke and blood. Children clung to their mothers, chewing quietly, eyes wide, as if afraid the miracle might fade. Priests knelt in the dirt, whispering prayers of thanks. Etienne helped pour water from one of the casks into wooden bowls. "Careful," he said with a tired grin. "There's enough for everyone." The men who had stayed behind clasped our hands, their faces bright with disbelief. Some wept openly, thanking us as if we had carried the food from heaven itself. For a brief moment, the courtyard no longer felt like a tomb. At dusk, they built a small fire and gathered near the chapel steps. Etienne stood, armor still dented and stained, and led the prayer for the fallen. Geoffroy's name came first, spoken softly, but with pride. Then the others, those who had not returned. The silence that followed was heavy, but not hopeless. When it ended, the fire crackled, and the smell of stewed fish filled the air. A little boy, no older than 10, handed me a piece of bread. "For the knights," he said. I took it and smiled. "Thank you," I answered. As night settled, the joy began to fade into quiet reflection. Odo sat near the gate, staring at the iron doors. Etienne joined him, passing a small flask between them. I sat across the fire, watching their faces glow in the flickering light. "The stores will last a few weeks," Odo said finally. "Maybe longer if we ration carefully." "And then?" one of the soldiers asked. No one answered. The question hung in the air like smoke. The firelight flickered against the chapel wall, and the sound of the wind filled the silence. Beyond the gate, faint thuds came from the street, dull, steady, patient. The dead hadn't gone anywhere. They were just waiting. Etienne looked up at me. "We bought time," he said quietly. "But that's all we've bought." I stared into the fire. For a moment, the faces of the lost passed through my thoughts. Geoffroy, the brothers who fell, the city we had failed to save. But then I remembered the sound of laughter earlier, the sight of children eating again, the firelight on steel. "We have walls," I said. "We have swords, and we have the will to live." That's enough. Etienne met my eyes. Enough for what? To take back Acre, I said. We seal the gates. We block the streets. Then we clear the city one piece at a time. Odo gave a faint, bitter laugh. You think we can purge this place? I nodded slowly. With what happened today, I think we can start. Etienne smiled faintly, his gaze fixed on the flames. If Geoffroy were here, he'd say the same. I looked at him and answered, then we'll make sure his faith wasn't wasted. For a moment, silence held between us. Then Etienne nodded, slow but firm. Around the fire, the others straightened, shoulders squaring, eyes burning with something I hadn't seen in weeks. Hope. Someone began to chant softly, a line from the old prayers we'd long abandoned. Another voice joined in, then another, until the courtyard filled with quiet, steady voices. Tired men and women reminding themselves they were still alive. Etienne stood and raised his sword, the firelight gleaming along its battered edge. For Acre, he said. For Acre, we answered. The sound rolled across the fortress walls, no longer a whisper of survival, but a vow. They cheered, their voices breaking the stillness, rising with the dawn. The fire burned brighter, casting long shadows over the walls. For the first time since Acre fell, the fortress didn't feel like a tomb. It felt like hope reborn